We walked a while to the main street, then slipped into another street with barely any people. We passed by some buildings and met with the pathway up. Through that we could see the flourishing trees and grass fields. The road wasn't your ordinary road, as it was decorated with several very detailed small lamps that were brightening up the area. The beautiful sight reminded me of fireflies. Then I took a closer look at the grass and the trees to see that they were all treated with care, just like the ones in the well-cared garden. Then I spotted the sign with East Hill written on it, and because curious. Why are we here all of a sudden? I dimly knew of this place. This was a walkway made by carving a mound owned by the Duke family. It was also the usual date location for the normal mode heroine and the capture targets. Of course, it was my first time here, as I was never in a situation to date any of them. The walkway was luxurious, however, access to it was strictly controlled. It meant that ordinary commoners could not enter. Are you planning to stab me where there are no people? I stopped in my tracks after I passed the sign. Just a moment, then Derrick coldly turned towards me. What is it? Why are we going up there? Didn't you say you wanted to be punished? Follow without complaining. He turned back again and started walking again. In a flash, we passed the entrance and climbed onto the ramp. I couldn't talk back to that, as there was something I said before. I also couldn't predict what he would say if I were to say I didn't want to go. I followed him without having much of a choice, but this body got tired too fast even when we didn't walk that much, and I had to almost run rather than to walk at his fast speed. Ha ha, I breathed heavily behind the mask on my face as I thought. Is the punishment he's going to give me perhaps climbing up this hill? If that's the case, then he really was a cruel bastard. Not being considerate for a lady, Derrick continued walking fast without looking back. Without holding back any longer at that sight, I spoke. Wait, what again? He didn't stop walking this time, as he replied annoyedly. And that was enough to make me feel scared again. Even so, I couldn't continue to be dragged like this by him. The robe I was wearing was already dirty on the lower ends. It's hard to keep up if you walk that fast, I protested with a timid voice. I thought he'd ignore me, to be honest. Or if not, he'd at least spit out insults like he did every time. Surprisingly, however, his steps began to slow down. And soon there was a constant distance between him and I. I'm fine, right? I glimpsed up above his head. Interest 13% was shining brightly like an indicator even in the dark. For how much longer did we walk in silence? A beautiful gazebo was seen from afar. At last we reached the top of the hill. I looked inside and frowned. What the? I thought this was the date spot. It was mentioned as a place for a secretive meeting between a guy and a girl in the game, but it was empty inside when I looked in it. I'm scared of being alone with this dude. I moved over to the bench powerlessly. I was out of energy coming up here. I was desperately in need for a break. Come this way, but before having to take a step, Derrick dragged me again. It was only after we reached the top of the hill that he stopped walking. Look down I did, as he said, having no power at all to protest. But my eyes grew wider at the sight. You'll miss a lot if you were to underestimate this place just because of the hill. Under us we could see the spectacular view of the capital city where the festival was in full swing. Night streets embroidered with colorful lanterns, antique buildings, and countless people streaming through. There was no festival episode in normal mode, and I wasn't able to get far enough to play the festival episode in the hard mode. Therefore the scene right now was something I didn't get to see even in the game. I looked down the hill fascinated. I didn't know it was this of a beautiful world down there when I was in the streets myself. I couldn't even think about feeling the beauty of the city then. I was always so full on guard, and always stressed out thinking of plans of things that may happen just in case. It was the same on Earth too. I didn't have the chance to look around me in my entire life. But now that I take a step back and look at the world, why does it feel so realistic? This was a weird, way too weird feeling. My heart, it felt weird. It's nothing more than a scene in the game. It was then Derrick raised his hand and pointed it at one place. Look over there, Penelope. I got out of my imaginations and moved my gaze at where he pointed at. The place wasn't far from this hill. It was a large street where a lot of people were walking through. There were two knights in their silver armor, running in a fast speed in the middle of the crowd. That's a man was running away from the two knights who were chasing him. But it was only a moment after that he came to a stop and was caught. It was because the place was too crowded for him to get away. It seemed like he stole something, which was a pretty common thing that happens especially during the festival times. Reality or in the game, people are all the same. I was thinking that when Derrick, who was staring at the same scene, opened his mouth. Those robbers are nothing. Many culprits of much harsher crime appears from everywhere around you during the festival. There are probably much harsher things happening at where we can't see from here. There was a murder incident yesterday at a bar by Hamilton Street. Though you who's always been in your room wouldn't know. Are you slagging me off right now? I looked up at Derrick, curious. I didn't get why he was telling me this all of a sudden. Things are like this even in the areas the Duke family watches over. What do you think it'll be like in the small streets on the upper portion, where many culprits and dangerous people roam around? His continued words made me realize that this was a conversation continuing from the scolding from before we came up here, by the escape hole. If so, then is this an admonition or a mockery? Now all there's need for me to do is figure out his purpose on leading me up here. Are you planning on befriending those people and start hanging out with them now? Here's an immediate response to my last question. It's a mockery. What did I expect? I sighed once and spoke, leaving a moment of silence before I did. I swear I didn't do anything that would bring down our family's reputation. It's not you who chooses what's good or bad for the reputation. Reputation is what follows after your actions. That is why I wore a mask. I shrugged, then Derrick icily glared at me. What if there are people who recognizes you immediately like I did? No, before all that, do you think that the people who find out that you're a girl would leave you be with your mask on? I'm not a little kid, first young master, I replied without hesitation. It is true I have made a lot of scenes up until now while not knowing my place, but even so, I'm not an idiot who enters a dangerous place with my own wills. I was scared of how he'll answer me with now that I've said this to him, but it was something I had to go through anyways, at least once. I didn't have a chance to properly confront Derrick as I was busy handling the Duke up until now. So I had to draw the line between us that we both shouldn't cross, just like I did with Reynolds. You say you're an idiot. Are you saying that not even an idiot, but a gongnu would crawl through the hole to escape? The reason why I went out secretly without telling anyone about it is I worked my brain to come up with something while buying me some time by slowing down my speech. An excuse that's not exaggerated but enough to make Derrick, who's more harder to deal with than the Duke, understand. I told you that I'll live like a non-existent person so that you wouldn't have to mind at all. And the first master also wanted this. So I only went out and came back quietly without making a scene. Yeah, that's right, you told me to live as quietly as a mouse would, so I quietly went out and quietly came back. A brilliant excuse, but it didn't seem to satisfy Derrick as his expression hardened up even more. What's your purpose on going to that place? He didn't stop his interrogation. And that made me tired. Do I have to tell you that too? You better answer me. I was going to search for a person by requesting an informant. I knew that an excuse such as "it's a lady's secret" would only work on Winter. I held in a sigh as I took a portion of truths and lies to make something up. It was something I did every time in front of Derrick. There's a person who helped me out at the Royal Palace, and I wanted to apologize as I lost his belonging he has lent me. Derrick, who was making things difficult with all those questions, shut his mouth as soon as I finished my sentence. I felt refreshed at that sight. It was because I was talking about Winter's handkerchief that Derrick had ordered the servants to throw away. Derrick kept his mouth shut for a while, then opened his mouth heavily. If it was necessary, we could have them do the things below us. The rumor that a nobleman, a lady who hasn't been married yet, is looking for a man of unknown origin is a disgrace to this family. I made a wedge with a smooth recitation. Penelope, seen from Derrick's point of view, also needed a change. It's not a parasite who yells at me every time and makes nonsense and stubbornness, it's just a little bit of a thought. So whatever I do, won't you mind me completely? I looked at a good 13% with cold eyes. I've lowered myself as low as I can and said it politely so there won't be a fall. But he didn't even have a rise, Penelope. But why? Derrick opened his mouth with a deep sigh. You're an adult soon, so I won't bother you until you don't want to know your destination. But if you're going to go out, don't use the dog hole, just use the front door proudly. I'll tell the butler favorite 17%, or you can drag out the slave you bring in. Derrick's favorability has risen. I didn't understand. Not only his favor but also his words to me. If I'll die in your hand without knowing what my mistake is, then why do you do me a favor? Considering Penelope in the past, his questioning of a secret outing was justified. And if you go anywhere and run around like a crazy dog, then it's all up to him. However, it was an unexpected scenario that he would continue to admit to going out like today. Won't you punish me? I asked with a puzzled look. Derrick frowned instead of answering. You didn't walk all the way to the mansion wearing that stupid-looking mask, did you? What? He suddenly reached out to me. Then he grabbed the mask I was wearing on my face. For lowering Eckhart's status, this is confiscation. The mask came off without a moment's. A cool night breeze touched my face, which had been tightly covered all day. Looking up from a narrow view, Derrick seemed very cold and angry. But when I saw him holding my mask of Haho mask with open eyes, I felt somehow this is today's punishment. Is it an illusion to look happy? Leonard bought it for me. I mumbled absent-mindedly, looking alternately at his face and my mask taken away. Take this. Then he popped out something to me. I carved magic on the jewels. When you wear it, you can activate the protective magic and the appearance change magic. The wizards who carried it said it's going to look like a boy your age from the eyes of someone else. On his large palm, a handkerchief with a platinum string bracelet with finely scarlet gems showed up. The things that were originally attached were broken because they were cheap, so I changed them into the best garnet. Derrick added. He sounded like he was grumbling. I looked down at his big hand in a big way. On the first day of the festival, sneaking out to save Eclipse, it was the bracelet that Derrick picked out when I picked up the mask. Looking at the right plum-colored jewels, I thought it was similar to my hair color, but I didn't think he would give it to me as a gift. Because it was enough pink, I thought you'd keep it and give it to the FL later, but it's already the second present. Expensive-looking scarves and magic bracelets. When I looked up and saw Derrick's blue eyes again, I felt strange. Why? That's how the words popped out earlier than I thought. What? Why do you give me this? I glanced down at the bracelet again, asking so. When I switched to a top-class garnet, the small gems of crimson glowed brightly in the dark. Even I, who was not very interested in accessories, had such a fine figure. But rather than gratitude for giving the bracelet, they were ahead of questions and doubts. He and Leonard have had a history. The vulgar thing, the eyes that looked like dirt on Penelope's memory. You didn't like me being extravagant, wasn't it that you liked accessories? Derrick seemed a little embarrassed for some reason at what I said. I like it, I admitted mildly. Even in the game, Penelope couldn't use any fancy accessories. But it was the only way to fill solitude and sadness. My complete jewels that I didn't steal from others. I don't know why you're giving me this, because you despised me so much. I didn't know how far Derrick had figured out what I was saying. I'm sure he's got a stiff look on his face because he remembers what I said. If you don't want it, get rid of it. He easily flipped the handkerchief he had put on the bracelet. A sparkling platinum string crashed to the ground and he rolled over the dirty dirt. Struggling with his absurd behavior, Derrick turned and quickly walked down the slope. It was a moment when I was wondering if I should follow. Derrick and Festival View Quest success. Would you like to get a reward for system? Yes or no? Suddenly a white square window popped up in front of my eyes. I was stunned with laughter. Is this quest still not finished? I definitely pressed refuse when asked if I would do it again before, but why is it a success? I frowned and nervously pressed yes. The writing in the square window changed rapidly. I got favorability plus 3% and magic bracelet from Derrick for system rewards. Oh, this is a guitar reward. I remember it saying favorite guitar, but not like it. I didn't really care because I didn't need anything. I looked down at the bracelet rolling on the dirt floor with cold eyes. Mean bastard. Eventually he crouched on the floor and picked up the fallen bracelet. So you really throw it away? When I was shaking off the soil that was covered by the wind, I suddenly felt sad because I was in such a desperate situation where I had to be rewarded and receive something like this. What's the use of a gift? Favorite 20%. I whined dissatisfiedly as I saw the white writing getting smaller and smaller. The last day of the festival, which had been long and long for nearly a month, has come. Emily made a fuss that there would be more spectacular parades, acrobatic troops, fireworks, and other attractions than ever since it was the last day. She meant to go out together, but I didn't want to do that at all, so I ignored it lightly and overslept. Having just got up and had a sandwich for breakfast, I sat down in front of my desk after a long time. It's been a long time since I came here. Seeing that they all clashed one by one throughout the festival, it seemed like it was time to turn over a big episode of the game. But it still stuck when I first came. Every single day was like a dying crisis. Of course, I'm still at the end of my tightrope. I couldn't do it, there is a long way to go. I'll have to do an interim check. I opened the drawer and pulled out the paper I had kept hidden deep. It was the basic setting of the male leads, who first came here, and wrote it down so as not to forget it. I took out a new piece of paper and began to write down my earlier favorability and recent developments. Derrick Eckhart 0% to 20%, Leonard Eckhart 10% to 10%, Callisto Legals 0% to 2%, Eccles 0% to 25%, Winter Verdandi 0% to 15%. As I wrote it down at a glance, the difference from the beginning was clearly noticeable. Unexpected, looking at Derrick and Leonard's favorability, I opened my eyes round. Especially Leonard, it was a far lower favorability than other male leads, but considering that it started in negative territory, it rose by as much as 20%. So was Derrick. Is it because I ran into him most often? I tilted my head and thought about their unexpected good defense. Just by looking at the paper written down at the beginning, I had put an X in their names without any sign of consideration. However, the two's favorability was not something to be happy about. Because I had a slight increase in my favorability when I don't meet. It was highly likely that Penelope was eased from being extremely hated to just disgraceful. Because I didn't act recklessly like the original fake princess. If we keep running into each other like this, we can maintain it. Both were not stable, considering that the basic favorability given in normal mode was 30%. But I didn't have a reset button, so I didn't even intend to take risks and raise my favor. I firmly drew an X on Derrick and Leonard's names as before. Next, Crown Prince, this guy is, well, not even a moment's consideration. I hit the X several times without a break and moved on to the next. But soon after, the hand holding the pen stopped. As planned, Eccles was currently the number one favorite. Now if you raise just 5%, you will fill the basic favorability of normal mode. It was not as difficult as others. Eccles's favorability was very wide of the increase. If it goes on like this, it would be quick to see the ending. Well, I've been so busy since last time that I haven't been able to meet him. Around the name of Eccles, Sharp Nib constantly drew a circle. In fact, I said I was busy by mouth, but nothing else was so busy except the day I met Winter. Nevertheless, I did not come and find him. Why do I feel so uncomfortable? I still remember that day clearly. A wooden sword aimed in the blink of an eye, a ghastly look as if it were an enemy at any moment. Reflectively shuddering, I strove, cynically caressing the ruby ring in my left hand. The moment the dog bites its owner, you just pull the leash. Of course, the moment the leash strangled the dog, he had to endure a fall in favor. I thought it was the only breakthrough, but why do I feel like I'm going to do something if I don't get it? I shook my head away from my anxious thoughts, and then I went on to the next one. Winter Verdandi, he was the first character to taste the fear of a plunge in favorability. I already decided not to look back at that moment, but when I saw the figure of 15%, I was a little worried. Although Winter had the biggest drawback of having the fastest contact with the FL, he also had the advantage of being the one of the top person of the 5. The speed of printing paper with the tip of a tap and pen gradually increased. I threw my pen in the air without making a clear decision. Why isn't there easy route? It was then. Knock knock on the door. I was extremely sensitive because I was scribbling down important things that others should not see. Therefore my voice stretched out sharply, unintentionally. Who is it? This is Pennell, miss. It was the butler. Wait. I grinned and relaxedly arranged the papers lying on my desk and put them deep in the drawer. He allowed the visit only after putting the pen I was holding on to the pen stand. Come in carefully. The door opened, and the butler came in. What's going on? I'm here to tell Lady that the Duke wants to have a luncheon with Lady after a long time. Lunch? I blinked my eyes. It was an unfamiliar remark. Ever since I came in here, I've been eating alone in my room. Compared to the dinner of a nobleman I know, it was honestly a series of absurd diets, but I was satisfied in my own way. It was better than eating rotten food or starving like the first time. Emily, who never bumps into the Duke and his sons for nothing and who is often stabbed by me, is attentive. How perfect a self-meal it is. I didn't want to go all the way down to the dining room on the first floor and face an uncomfortable person for lunch. Moreover, I was already feeling bloated when I imagined that I was eating under the eyes of employees who hated me for being a princess. I don't mind eating alone in the room as it has been. I wanted to avoid it if I could avoid it, so I gave a moderate refusal. The period of self-reflection is not over yet. The Duke said he have something to tell to the lady, so Lady must attend. If it's you're saying that all my brothers are joining too? Of course I'm doomed. I managed to catch a crumpled look. It was foolish to show a blatant dislike in front of the Duke and Derrick's closest aides. Mind control. I breathed a deep sigh inside. Butler, I have one thing to order before I go to the dining room. Give me your order, Lady. At my words he looked different. If you have any digestive medicine, will you bring it to my room after lunch? You mean the digestive medicine? He asked back as if he was curious about the unexpected digestive medicine, even though I had not eaten yet. Yes, I nodded strongly because I'm going to rush from now on. I followed the butler out of the room. It was because everyone was waiting for me downstairs after all the preparations for the luncheon had been completed. There was no time to procrastinate on the pretext of preparation for one-sided notification that could not be rejected. The Duke seems to be very busy with the royal palace these days. As I was walking down the hallway in silence, the butler suddenly talked to me, adjusting my stride. I had no idea that the Duke was busy. He seemed to be coming home late, but I wasn't very interested. I think he did, but I responded with a silent nod of the head with an expressionless face. For some reason I felt the butler carefully watching my face. In the past, every time the Duke was at home, he attended the dinner table regularly. By any chance did you have any inconveniences at the dining room? The question that followed quickly crumpled my forehead. Was Penelope like that? A brim is also good. What good there could be stuffed food in my throat in that position? If you see it, you'll only receive nothing but despised or ignored. She's really, however, I couldn't blame her thoughtlessly because I thought I could see why she attended the Duke's dinner. In the past, I, who was always quick to give up, never acted like Penelope. But that wasn't less miserable either. The sound of tableware coming from the dining room, the simple greeting of a day, asking each other the flawless family without me. Lady Penelope, Lady, I blinked at the voice calling me Penel, who had already reached the front of the stairs, looked at me with an unanswered eye. I didn't feel uncomfortable, I answered casually as I went down the stairs ahead of him before he found. I've been on my guard for making a mistake, so it's a good idea to take care of my meal in the room. I really think so. No, I'm not. I made a slip of the tongue. Perhaps it was surprising that Penelope's mouth said such a sound, but the butler made a slip of the tongue. He hurriedly stopped talking and changed the subject. The Duke was very lonely because Miss didn't come out of the room. You're not going to blame me for participating in the dinner. The butler's words made me laugh. If your dog doesn't come out of your house, you'll have to look into it. The head of the household feels lonely, but there seems to be no sincerity in looking into whether his youngest daughter, who he adopted himself, eats or starve in the corner of the room. Well, would my first brother think so too? That's at my self-help question. The butler tried to say something, but I was a step faster. Open up. Before I knew it, I had arrived at the dining room. He stood respectfully next to the tightly closed door to serve the meal and gave an arrogant nod to the waiters. I bowed and complied with my orders, but the eyes that shed to me were not beautiful. It didn't matter, I couldn't afford to care less about the little extras. The door opened, and through it the faces of the humans I really had to deal with. Middle-aged man with the brusque face at the top of the table and likes 10% sitting side by side on his right likes 20%. Do you have a sense of time or not? Why are you so late? As soon as I entered the room and saw 10% likable, started a quarrel, frowning. It was the beginning of a dinner in hell. I naturally moved to the left because they were sitting on the right side of the Duke. The butler, who followed and pulled out the chair, withdrew after confirming that I was perfectly seated. I walked on my feet and felt as if I had become a sinner who had been sent away. You said it's luncheon, but your table is broken. It was a feast of sumptuous food that had never been seen since coming here. Of course, it would be difficult to eat these much-needed foods because we have to solve them in a room on the second floor, but I realized the location of Penelope. By the time he was dazed, a heavy voice fell from the Duke sitting at the top. Prepare it, a full-fledged meal has begun. In fact, I didn't know much about the order of tableware used by the nobles. But Penelope wasn't always so common sense. Therefore, even if you don't use proper etiquette, you won't be much flawed. It's a good thing you don't have a reputation to lose. I looked down at the tableware set in front of me to make sure everyone was holding a spoon with a side glance and to follow. And then a cool smile immediately popped out. All the dishes I was given were for plate by young children who had just learned how to use the fork. What's the matter? Perhaps he heard my laughter, but the sharp eyes of the Duke right next to blossomed into me. It's nothing. I shook my head in a hurry. And I listened to the tableware casually. Come to think of it, they wouldn't care what kind of spoon I was eating with anyway. If you cared a little bit, you'd already know the Duke right next to you. Someone in the kitchen dared to play this prank on a princess table. I held up the biggest spoon in the mood of playing with dolls. It was the biggest of all that lay, but smaller than a teaspoon. I tried to scoop up the soup with it, but it was only a rat's tail. Fork couldn't even lift the lettuce from the salad. The knife, which is good in size, was so slow that it could not even penetrate the surface of the meat that was baked smoothly. This is interesting. I took turns lifting the utensils as if I were playing a joke. And I touched the steaming food in front of me with them. I wanted to see if I can't eat it. How on earth did Emily fly the food so hard when the kitchen was in such a bad situation? Come to think of it, was even if rotten food is distributed, employees working in the kitchen are poorly treated. Emily has brought me a whole bunch of healthy food since I threatened her. In addition, sometimes when I talk about the food I want to eat, she even made it awkwardly. I should give her a prize when I get back to my room. In the meantime, I felt a little sorry for Emily for setting up an iron wall. In addition, I thought, looking at the dishes that had been randomly shriveled on the plate with my eyes. You'd better kill the flag. After all, I couldn't eat a single bite properly. As expected, the Duke and the two brothers had no idea whether I was eating or playing with food. This was Penelope's position. The festival is already over. It was when the meal time was somewhat ripe the Duke opened his mouth with wine. But I was the first target. You're not going out on your last day. Yes, in a state of irritation, I answered bluntly. Penelope must have been out on the last day of the festival. I didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to please the Duke because I couldn't even touch these delicious things in front of me. However, my cold attitude instantly turned the eyes of the first and second. I'm blinking in favor, oh you swordsman. I looked back at the Duke with a smile that had not come out. I'm on probation. Well, he's been using his word of duty for a long time. The Duke kicked his tongue as if my answer was disapproving. I've never seen a cripple claiming to be on probation because of a single slave. Leonard was sarcastic. No one responded as if it were ever happening. I didn't even expect anyone to shut his mouth, so I didn't care and threw a stop to myself. There's other reason why I called you to have lunch today. Meanwhile, the Duke told me the real reason why he even called me here. Because of the upcoming hunting competition. Hunting competition? I pondered over the contents of the game. It didn't immediately occur to me whether there was such a thing. It's going to be held again in the northern forest of the palace. In the meantime, the Duke gracefully laid down the tableware and continued to speak. As you all know, this hunting competition is significant. The Crown Prince decided to release rare animals representing each country, including royalty and aristocrats from the country that was subjugated by the war. The eyes of those who support the Crown Prince for not participating in the war are not favorable. At times like this, it would be better to consolidate our status. So last night at a meeting of the nobility, Eckhart also expressed his intention to attend the hunt. They were words that had nothing to do with me anyway. While half-heartedly listening to the Duke, I suddenly remembered the hunting contest in the game. The Inca Empire holds a hunting competition every quarter. to impose indirect pressure on rare creatures or slaves in each defeated country. I have seen a brief background explanation while playing normal mode. However, FL was not able to attend the hunting competition at this time. This is because Penelope secretly fed poison to the returning real princess who was jealous of the attention of the male leads. FL, who couldn't go to the hunting competition because she was wandering, instead raised Eccles's favorability left in the mansion. It was the moment when Penelope's last hope left. Since then the hunting competition has disappeared as a woman like a relative who has failed to see the evil deeds of the cruel empire persuaded the Crown Prince. And at the end of Crown Prince Route, Penelope is simply tortured as all the atrocities she committed against the FL are revealed. It was a torture of freezing the heart alive so that it could not die and feeding the poison that had been fed to the FL one by one. Penelope's face, which had been cruelly melted by the poison. I shuddered reflexively as a series of vivid illustrations emerged. It was then the Duke who talked about the aristocratic meetings suddenly turned to me. Penelope, yes, I didn't listen at all to what he said, but I was stunned and stuttered like a fool. Fortunately the Duke take it lightly. A vote was made at the meeting to lift the ban of woman participation. Participation banned, yeah, what do you think about it? I couldn't answer the Duke's question right away. What's that about? I didn't know what kind of violence Penelope had in the hunting competition. I felt uneasy as I hesitated. The Duke asked me again whether I would participate. If you're going to participate, I'll tell them to trim your hunting gear as well. Father, it was then boom. Pink Hair pounded the table violently and shouted loudly. That crazy bitch, no, that girl, she did something last year, and she's going to do it again. Leonard, the Duke, kicked his tongue and called out his second son. When I think of the time when aristocratic's daughters were flocking around and begging me, that it's like keeping them in prison at every hunting contest. But despite the Duke's dissuasion, Leonard stared at me furiously until the end and shook his teeth. His eyes were looking at the bandwagon. First of all, we need to figure out what the situation is. I went out as brazen as Penelope. What did I do? Do you ask because you don't know? Then if I know, do you think I'll ask? The words I wanted to shoot at Leonard, who had a sneaky answer, filled my throat. But I had to put up with it. We need to know the whole story by provoking him. But the answer I really wanted came from an unexpected person. I asked other ladies to make a crossbow that they didn't care about. The calm voice compared to Leonard made me turn my head. The first one stared at me with blue eyes and whispered softly. You must have already forgot, even though it was dangerous you took it with you. Overpowered the guards like a beast and running around to shoot and kill Countess Kellen and her flock at the tea party. So for a while there was a rumor that someone was teaching the crossbow to a crazy chimpanzee in Eckhart. As soon as Derrick was finished, Leonard smiled coldly and sarcastically. I'm going to get ruined. I couldn't answer anything back because of the enormous violence that I couldn't get rid of. But it wasn't as surprising and shocking as I was prepared. Yes, she's the worst villain in the game, and she should have done that. It was not as drunk as some of the truths you see at the opening meeting, but it was a sufficiently manageable line. Stop it, I'm sure she had regretted enough while I was silent. The Duke stopped two men who peeled me off in a quivering voice. It was not a bad timing, even though I had already been reprimanded. As the two sons shut up, the Duke looked at me with a grave look and warned. You still remember that Eckhart's mouth is heavy, Penelope? Yes, you won't be disappointed this time, Father. I answered promptly. I heard the sound of grinding my teeth from one side to see if the medicine was getting better. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. The Duke lightly struck the bell on the table, as if all the words had been said. Then the door of the dining room opened and a servant with a cart pulled in. It was a dessert. I didn't even eat. What kind of dessert is that? I looked at the servant with gloomy eyes, each laying down a different dessert. A middle-aged woman named Mrs. Donna has long been in charge of the Duke's kitchen. And that's how much they understood their taste in food. In front of Duke and Derrick were teacups with black tea, and in front of Leonard a plate with handmade cookies. It was my turn next. I didn't mind anything because I originally liked desserts. What is it, however? I had no choice but to frown at the plate placed in front of me. It was a mellow milk pudding. The woman who was putting down my dessert laughed at my clean dishes without any sign of eating. It was such a small sound that only my ears could hear. The eyes met her eyes were full of ridicule as if she were dying of joy. Let's try it, shall we? I quickly dropped the smallest spoon on the floor before she left. Marbles and iron bumps into each other, and makes quite a lot of noise. Naturally, everyone in the dining room looked at me. Oh, sorry, my hand slipped. Will you pick it up and take it? I gave the floor a big wink of apology. Mrs. Donna was also nonchalant about my unexpected behavior. She looked very familiar, as if she could do anything about it. Sure, don't worry about it, lady. If it were Penelope, would he have thrown a spoon over Mrs. Donna's head and already got up? No, I asserted myself. The old woman, whom I learned from the butler's words, has been a regular participant in the meal of the Duke for an uninvited seat. In other words, no one else has dealt with her except on a time like this. It's a family dinner where she only left out while a pleasant conversations are exchanged. It is a position where she forced herself to sit in while enduring alienation and misery. However, if the Duke did not like the dishware, he would never have tried to share it with her again. Penelope knew this well, therefore she would have endured hunger and anger desperately. If she couldn't even participate in this event, she'd never run into this family. But not me. I looked down at Mrs. Donna, whose face was so expressionless that I was embarrassed by her fuss. Oh my God, sorry, I slipped again. The second smallest spoon fell in front of Mrs. Donna, who was just getting up with the spoon I had dropped. The attention of the humans who were drawing attention was drawn back to me. The Duke kicked his tongue disapprovingly. What are you doing? I'm sorry, the pudding is so soft that the spoon keeps going off. I replied with a shrug, Derrick's cool blue eyes fixed on me. Leonard was no different. It's all right, lady. Mrs. Donna also picked up the second spoon that fell beside her without complaint. Well, have a good time. It was the moment when she was raising herself and greeting. I threw the last spoon right on the floor. Penelope echoed. The Duke's face and voice froze in an instant. What are you doing? Leonard laughed as if he was dumbfounded, and Derrick glared at me with a frown on his face. The white letters on their heads began to flicker. I got up from my seat, dragging my chair noisily. I'm afraid I can't eat dessert because I don't have any more spoons. Sit down if you're finished with what you want to say. I'm thinking of going up to my room. The Duke's face was gradually filled with anger. What's the point of doing this at a luncheon after a long time? I'm so hungry, father. I overpowered my stomach. My unexpected words wriggled the eyes of the Duke and the sons. What, I'm not as good at using tableware as I am 3 years old, so I can't eat a bite of these foods. As if I were a real child, I looked at their face with a gloomy look. The untouched food had not cooled yet. If I go up to the room as it is, it will be all up to the employees. Stupid Penelope would starve his people to death every time. Right, ma'am, I smiled innocently, and asked Mrs. Donna for her consent. Oh, lady, her face went black and white in a moment. It was funny that the previous confidence and ridicule disappeared from nowhere. A cool silence fell on the dining room. Main dish with no small toy utensils and no signs of touching. The white plate without a single sauce was so clean that it was hard to do so without complaining about the seat. I now knew well without having to see where everyone's eyes were. I'm going to go up and ask Emily to get me a sandwich so I can eat it with my hands. Have a good time, father. Brothers, no one helped me this time. As I opened the closed door and left the dining room on my own, I suddenly burst out laughing. I threatened everyone I'd shoot them with crossbow. Yes, I'd say yes. Isn't it really funny? Such a wicked woman was being held captive because she couldn't do such a thing. But nevertheless, I was not the only one who could laugh at such Penelope. I feel so sorry for her who sat there till the end enduring hunger. For pity's sake, coming straight up to the room, I took out the book I was reading from the bookshelf and sat down at my desk. I confidently left the dining room saying I was hungry, but I wasn't that hungry. Rather, I was honestly worried that it would affect Emil's favorability after I came out of the mess. At the end there was no change. I was worried that I couldn't check their faces properly because I was paying attention to the Duke and Mrs. Donna. You're not going to lose your favor if you throw your spoon in a rude way. I thought so, but soon I decided to take it easy. Well, if you're a little far away, that's not much. It may be a relief, but it didn't matter how much change was made because they were X-rated anyway. As long as it's not a deathly plunge. I tried so hard to focus on the contents of the book, it was that moment. Knock knock, I heard someone identify herself. Lady, it's me. Come in. Emily gladly allowed herself, and opening the door, she carefully stepped inside holding a lidded tray. Are you reading? What's that? As I asked with a glare, she put down the tray she had brought on the desk and opened the lid. Steamed soup, steaks, and sandwiches were neatly laid out. I immediately frowned. This is because the steaks plate was the same plating as the one at the dinner. It's a new one because the Duke ordered it, lady. Maybe she heard the whole story, but Emily slowly took a look at me and added, and this is what the butler told me to bring you: a small brown bottle of digestive medicine. No thanks, I don't want to eat much, so take it out. Fortunately or unfortunately, I had nothing to eat, so I had nothing to upset my stomach. Emily cried when I told her to take it back. I heard you wanted to have sandwiches. You're hungry, hurry up and eat, lady, it's okay. And I ate earlier. You haven't had a proper meal all day, so just a little bit. Not just today, it's always been. I threw down the book and grazed my brain irritably. Was there any food you brought that could be called a proper aristocratic meal? Oh, Lady Emily was at a loss what to do with my cold look. I knew it was a useless vent. Emily has been good enough to me as long as I can. It is not that I was very dissatisfied with the meal, which had only 1 or 2 dishes and desserts. I never starving, but still in my situation. No, this situation and background facing Penelope was irritating and driving me crazy. Stop carrying that and go out. I don't really want to see your face right now. Emily eventually took the tray back with a somber face. I thought I was too much for someone who took care of me because I was worried, but I didn't feel very sorry. From the moment I left the dining room, I opened the book again, pressing down on my rising emotions. But soon after I threw it back down as if I had thrown it back. I'm annoyed. Standing up in front of my desk, I went to bed and lay down. A luxurious antique room ceiling was visible. The owner of the room couldn't even get a proper meal, but it was funny because it seemed to be wrapped up in a plausible way. Why should I come all this way and go through this shit? I couldn't understand it at all, so I muttered to myself. If someone other than me was possessed by this game, I might be happy to see such a spacious and lavishly decorated room. But I wasn't particularly impressed with these things. It is because the place where I stayed at my parents' house was also luxurious and spacious enough to live in. But ironically, living in such a fancy room, I was worried about eating the next day. After the second son of a bitch graduated, bullying at school reached its peak. It was basic to keep getting cut in line and eat the last meal of the day, and it was usual to deliberately hit the shoulders and make them spill the plate. Even if I starved all day and went home, I couldn't eat right away. Except for me, they did attend a nice family meal. Where is his pride now that we have succeeded in escaping? It was truly foolish. I should have had enough food to last, unlike Penelope, who has a maid. I didn't have anyone to feed me. She used to leave work right after finishing the dishes. I held my stomach tightly and went to the kitchen only when the men of the house finished their meal and went into their respective rooms. Then I put rice in a cold soup or poured the leftover side dishes into a large spoon and rubbed them to eat them. However, I often spits it out without a bite more than when I can eat it whole. While the rest of the soup or side dishes tasted terrible, mixing vinegar, sugar, salt, salted fish, and sometimes unknown things. It was the second son of a bitch, a beggar, so why are you sneaking around like a rat? He sometimes hid and watched me like that, and then giggled out and sarcastically. So I had to suffer from malnutrition and chronic gastritis until I escaped from that damn place. I was really like a beggar. Looking back on the past, I smiled weakly. I thought maybe it was much better to be a fake princess now, which I thought was no better than me. That's enough, it's nothing more than past. I jumped out of bed. At times like this, I had to move my body. Staying still will only erode you into gloomy thoughts. I took out a shawl and went out of the room. I was going to take a walk. I was just going down the stairs across the hall, lady. I happened to run into the butler, who was coming down from upstairs. He asked with astonishment, "Where are you going outside the house? You're going to East Hill to see the fireworks?" East Hill, as I asked back, I immediately remembered where it was. Not long ago it was a small hill where I was taken by Derrick and came down alone. Penelope must have been out to watch fireworks on the last day of the festival every year. I found out why the Duke asked such a question at the dining room. No, I shook my head straight away. I wasn't romantic enough to go all the way there just to see fireworks. What are you doing this time? I'm bored, the butler put on an awkward face. It may be quite embarrassing to see a kid who had been going steady until last year suddenly change her attitude. But it didn't matter, a wicked woman is bound to boil with whims. To celebrate the victory, the finale of this festival will be much bigger than last year. Fireworks will be everywhere. I don't know why the butler is holding me back and telling me this story. It was very uncomfortable to face him because he was also at the luncheon earlier. Good luck then, I brushed right past him, Lady Penelope. But I couldn't go down the stairs because of the urgent voice that held me. Why down a notch? I stopped and looked back at him. The old butler hesitated for a while and managed to open his mouth. I'm on my way back from organizing the attic under the direction of the Duke. I'm on my way to deliver it to you. To me, I wondered why the butler told me that. The passage to the attic was at the end of the corridor on the 3rd floor. So I've never been there. Why? Don't you often go up when you're young? When you first came to the dukedom, you saw fireworks in the attic. The Duke probably told me to clean up the attic because he remembered it. You have to say what you want to say right away, butler. I cut off him coldly with a sarcasm, burst into laughter. I've been in a position where I couldn't go up even though I wanted to. Thanks to someone who felt uncomfortable for me climbing up there often, the 3rd floor was closed and I couldn't get near the attic. His mouth shut. I wouldn't have been this aggressive if I were normal. The butler happened to have a bad time. It was because he caught me, who was on my way to calm down my anger because of the strangely overlapping situation with the past. My sharp point carved deep wrinkles on the butler's forehead. Mrs. Donna was fired immediately, miss. He carefully opened his mouth again with a darkened look. The Duke was so angry that she was kicked out naked without a penny of severance pay. There was no more punishment for this woman, who had been a duchess for a long time, and who was a fallen family but who had enemies in her own right. I opened my eyes wide at the unexpected news. Looking at the butler with a puzzled look, he calmly continued. But Master Derrick has come forward and burned his employment contracts and letters of recommendation, so she won't be able to find a job in the aristocracy. So do I owe you a toast? I blinked and asked back in a cold tone. It was a little surprising, but it wasn't exactly a pleasant story. Why didn't you take any action last time to solve a problem that can be solved right away? What's with the measures? I would read about how long Emily had worked and threaten her to live quietly. When I recalled Derrick at that time, I felt even more pathetic. You don't have to give me all that stuff, it's not my responsibility anyway. The Duke was heartbroken by the day. He seemed to keep worrying about your skipping meals. So what do you want me to do? Pressing down the words that filled my throat, I forced up the corners of my mouth. If I go down to the dining room and eat now, will my father feel better? Princess, it was then. It's all my fault today. The butler suddenly bowed deeply in front of me. I opened my eyes wide. My biggest fault is that I haven't been able to faithfully support you under the pretext of being busy. If you punish me separately, I'll take it sweetly. By the way, my lady, could you please accept the Duke's sincerity? I looked at the butler with a strident glance, bowing before me. After leaving the dining room like that, the Duke thought a lot about how to get rid of your hurt feelings. Then he came up with what you liked when you were young. You know it's very rare to withdraw an order once you've given us what the butler said was true. It has already been 6 years since he locked up all the doors on the 3rd floor and banned her from entering due to a small commotion that took place shortly after she was adopted. But now that you want to withdraw it, it must have been shocking in many ways to see your abused foster daughter who showed you her broken heart. The butler stooped more closely, seeing me thoughtless and silent, thinking that there was hope. The old man opened the 3rd floor, which was closed himself, and arranged the attic with all his heart. So let's get out of here, lady. I looked at the butler with a dull face without an answer. If it was really Penelope who was here now, not me, she would have been so happy. One of the humans who led the bullying was fired and the family's attention was drawn. How satisfying would this situation be for the deacon, whom I have always felt sorry for, to nod his head to me. But it's late. I wasn't Penelope. Why didn't you do this for her at least once before I came into this body? If so, this stupid, pathetic little girl would have forgiven everything, unlike me. It's too late at the moment. The butler's pupils, which found my face distorted in a mess expanded greatly. "Oh lady," when the embarrassed man raised his back completely, yes. How can I ignore my father's sincerity? I had a quick look on my face. I was just on my way out for a walk, so it wouldn't be a bad idea to go there after a long time. When he looked like he was going to cry, I went back to my arrogant Penelope and said, "Take me to the attic." It did not seem to have fully opened the third floor. Crossing the hallway, a large two-door was tightly locked with a chain wrapped around it. "That's the ladies' room, isn't it?" Penelope's room was pretty good, but the FL's room was different from the size of the door. It wasn't offensive or upsetting. How can a real daughter and an adopted daughter be treated the same way? "You need to know your place." As I passed in front of it, the butler looked at me with a particularly. Of course I didn't show anything. When I opened the small door at the end of the corridor on the third floor, a spiral stone staircase came out. It seemed to be a turret built in preparation for the invasion, but it was poorly managed compared to other places, perhaps because it had not been used for a long time. "Be careful with the high stairs, lady." The butler went up first and warned me. I grabbed my skirt and carefully climbed the stairs. The attic at the top of an old narrow stone tower. It's definitely a secret place for kids to like. He climbed and climbed spiral stairs with no end in sight. After a long time the stairs broke as if they had finally reached the end, and an old door came out. The butler opened it up with familiarity and went inside. After that I honestly didn't have much expectation. Even the attic was made by roughly removing the place used as a warehouse. But the place I entered was surprisingly good. Like a small study, on one side of the attic was filled with books, and on the other was a cozy couch and a fireplace. There was a large round window in the middle of the window. Through an open window gap a cool breeze came in and tickled the bridge of the nose. "Do you like it, my lady?" the butler asked me with a satisfied face when I looked around. I answered mildly, "This good. May I bring you some refreshments?" "No thanks, I'd rather stay here till late in the evening." "Of course you can. The Duke has already allowed us to spend as much as we want." I liked it. Feeling a little better, I spoke in a softer voice. "Thanks for your guidance, butler." "Don't mention it then. Make yourself comfortably, lady." The butler bowed to me and went down to the attic. I walked slowly inside, looking around the quiet interior once again. Penelope deserved to go up a lot. Comfortable, desolate. She was just adopted as a Duke daughter and was perfect for a hated child to hide without knowing the reason. I arrived in front of a large open window, then I glanced out. The sight of the window was very large. Therefore the city streets were not as visible as when I followed Derrick on the hill a while ago. Instead, it was good to see the endless sky and scenery, as there were no buildings high enough to block the view. I left a couch covered with blankets and flopped down on the bare floor in front of the window frame. The sun was setting outside the window. It was when I was staring blankly beyond the horizon, where the red sunset was overflowing. Suddenly I heard something behind my back. What? Someone with the pink hair just opened the door coming in and met my eyes. "Why are you here?" After finding out that it was me, Leonard stopped making a gesture and frowned. "First, do you think I'm happy to see you?" I glanced over his head and answered back calmly. "I'm here because the butler showed me around." "I'm not talking about that." Leonard glanced up and down at me, then laughed. "You're off the third floor, aren't you?" "Oh my God, who's the reason keeping me out?" Out of nowhere I snapped at him with a coy smile. "The entry ban has been lifted from today. My father gave me permission, that's why he suddenly asked me about the attic I didn't use." "So why are you here?" "I'm not off limits like some idiot." He walked in sarcastically. The figure was frowned upon. I didn't want to be disturbed alone by an unwelcome, uninvited guest. I was irritated to death. "I came first, so I was telling you to stay away from my seat." But he was not a man who'll listen to who said something. Leonard came into the attic without any distance, and lay down on a fluffy couch. And stared at me with languid, downcast eyes. "You're sitting on the ground there. That's a perfect seat for you. Why do you want to stay here, not in your room?" "It's because the second master of this house wanted to." Oh man, just the fist trembled. I wanted to put flowers in the face of a mean fellow, but I held it back desperately. 10% favorability, 10% favorability, it's just 10% earned. Only maintenance was the answer. Trying to ignore Leonard, I concentrated again outside the window, but he wouldn't leave me alone. What are you going to do sitting there like a rock? I'll just watch the fireworks and go right away, so don't worry. Sad I can't see the smoke field from here. He giggled and said, nonsense, it's the last day of the festival, so everyone else left early, and the slave boy you dragged will still be hit and run. What my mind went blank as if I had heard something I couldn't hear. I slowly turned my head towards him. What does that mean? Surely he'd stay alone training himself and die. Leonard grinned and replied deftly. I was speechless for a long time. I stammered and barely asked why on earth. Because I had him do it, you crazy bastard. I hear Eccles's favorability dropping vertically. What nonsense is going on? While I didn't care. No, I jumped out of my seat to check his favorability right away. And I was about to leave the attic in a hurry. Are you going to see him? He caught my wrist roughly. Lovely pink hair fluttered before my eyes. Before I knew it, Leonard, who had risen like lightning, was holding me. I frowned at my nervousness. Let go of me. It's late. He's been watched by me the moment you brought him in, Leonard said playfully, winking his eyes. My eyes were stunned. With a deep sigh I forced out his hand and recited nervously. Why are people so childish? Be kind, it's creepy to hear such a thing coming out of your mouth, man. He rubbed his arm too hard. I glanced sideways at favorability 10% above his head. What did he eat wrong today? Today's luncheon, which only I couldn't eat, was excellent. In other words, there is no reason for him to act like a man who is so impatient after having a meal. Of course he did that every time I ran into him, but today he was unusually serious. If you don't like me here, just say yes, I'll give you a space. I finally sighed and decided to step down. I was the only one to suffer more. It was best to avoid it, so tell me to get out of here quickly. I'll get myself out of here. I was quietly waiting for his answer. Don't you have any conscience? A man who stared at me suddenly uttered, nonsense. What? How dare you crawl in here? I couldn't help but laugh. You look like a grumpy daughter-in-law who doesn't like it. I didn't mean to laugh at Leonard, however I could see a spark in his blue eyes that heard my laughter. I quickly lowered my eyes and answered back obediently. What do you mean by that? You've been doing things you haven't been doing lately, and you've been stuck in your room, so I was wondering if you'd finally come to your senses. I'm crazy. I think this shameless little bitch has changed a little bit. I swallowed a sigh that leaked out into the temple. I don't know why I'm here to get rid of my anger. I, who used up all my anger during the conversation with the butler earlier, honestly felt tired and burdened by this situation. Along with the Crown Prince, Leonard was a time bomb that should not be touched as much as possible. I sweetened him with a tired voice. Leonard, don't spin around and say anything you want to say. Do it right away. Why are you doing this all of a sudden? You were going to make a wish here again, seeing if it was fireworks or shit, right? But before my words were finished, he stole them. I hope Yvonne never comes back to this house again. No. I wish she could disappear or die forever. The wish you had made here 6 years ago, knowing that you had lost Yvonne on the last day of the festival. Leonard's face before his nose was reddened by the glow of the sunset that leaked through the window. He was laughing furiously. The eyes were livable. Penelope did that. I had no choice but to stare at him in surprise. I didn't know that I lost FL at the festival. Come to think of it carefully, it seems to have come out as if it were in the game's prologue, but it was not particularly memorable because it had nothing to do with the story's progress. You became a princess overnight in the common people, so you might wish that the real princess would not return. Anyway, I was convinced of her behavior because I was in the position of Penelope. In fact, it may have been easier to understand because she has already experienced the situation of becoming a daughter of a rich family overnight. However, FL's second brother Leonard seemed to hate the fact that she climbed up to the attic again and again, which she had done in the past. How do you feel as you wish you've been in Yvonne's position for 6 years? Leonard's momentum was terrifying enough to believe that the dead-ending flag had blossomed. I looked at him, staring at me as if he were going to kill me, and picked out what to say. What's there to say without messing with that dirty temperament? On a miserable day when she lost her only brother, she even encountered a wicked woman who was taking her place. If you behave like the original Penelope, you'll be in big trouble. I started by rolling my eyes reflexively to see if there was anything around that would kill me. There was no sharp object in the attic, but it was useless to find such a thing. If Leonard excited pushes me out of the window or chokes me, I'll die. I was very young back then. Once I fell from the window. I opened my mouth with difficulty. I'm sorry, I apologize now. I've been reflecting on myself a lot, so please forgive me. Self-reflection, but Leonard didn't let go of his anger at the apology that I had chosen for my pains. Okay, it's all in the past, so let's ask, why did you do that? Even if Yvonne came back, I wouldn't have kicked you out right away. It was the most difficult situation I've ever faced him. Even a mild apology doesn't work. What should I say now? I was running out of words because I didn't even do it. I was sweating profusely. Answer me, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come up here, but I wasn't thinking straight. Is it easy for you to say sorry, Leonard? My father didn't tell me how he changed towards you. Tell me how to seduce a duke at that young age. I'll learn too. The situation was getting out of hand. His likability gauge began to glow dangerously. Leonard's eyes glared at me. It was not clear whether it was because of the sunset pouring out the window, or whether he was bloodshot with so much anger. It was unfair, and my mood gradually subsided, but I tried to judge coolly. This situation was dangerous enough, and should have been avoided quickly if it could not be defeated. I slowly opened my mouth. I'm so sorry I did that when I was immature. I sincerely apologize, but losing your sister has nothing to do with me. I came here today because the butler asked me to watch the fireworks show here. I heard my father gave me permission. So I've been here for a long time and I'm going back soon. You're noisy. Leonard suddenly rubbed his fingers through his ears as if he were bored. You were brought here as a substitute of Yvonne. I thought you'd be good at mimicking. I prayed with all my heart. You've made a rumor about crossbow chimpanzee, and you've brought in a slave boy who don't know his origin of, and you've already lost your reputation. It was always the back of prudence and disregard. I don't know how long you're going to make a chisel in this mansion. Someone's face overlapped with Leonard's face, which he scoffed at by twisting the corners of his mouth. Why do I have to come all the way here and see the beggar walking around? An auditory voice rang out in my ears. I've never said I didn't want to see anything like that. I'm afraid I'll be kicked out. A substitute? But why did it make me think of what happened earlier that I managed to calm down? Have you ever treated me as a substitute? My mouth chattered on its own as if the crossbow shooting chimpanzee had become my switch. Leonard, who didn't even listen, growled straight at my question. Then you don't even know the root of it. I picked you up and made you a princess. How much better do I have to treat you? Or should I treat you like a queen? Yes, be nice to me at least once. What if I feel good, I'll give you a copy of your missing sister. I clenched my teeth, sarcastic, and laughed with a messy face. On the other hand, the sarcastic corners of Leonard's mouth slowly went down. I felt the temperature in the room getting colder every minute. If it was just such a quarrel a little while ago, the present day Leonard was ferocious enough to tear me apart and kill me right away. Hey, he called me in a subdued voice. And favorability -2%, something that I was worried about, happened. Be careful of what you say, don't be so rude, how dare you? Why? Because we're on this topic, just better to speak up. You think you're the only one who hates me, right? 12-year-old Penelope was pictured in front of my eyes. I knew I couldn't do this anymore, but I couldn't stop myself, so am I. If I had known I'd starve with a great duke, I should never have come, no matter how much you asked me to come with you. Penelope Eckhart, how did I seduce him? It's nothing, just like you said to me, it's just a bunch of crap. Stop right there, Leonard warned grimly. Favorability 1%, the favorability has fallen again. He looked angry but inwardly embarrassed. It's always been their privilege to look scornfully at and sarcasm. Penelope would be surprised to see him like this, because when he got angry he rushed in with a groan. Perhaps I was surprised by the sudden change in my apology for not going against my feelings as much as I could. Either way, I felt sick and tired of it. I've been starving for days and days without my mother's funeral because I don't have any money, and one day your father called me a daughter and said to go with him. Have you ever tried the rainwater falling next to a decaying corpse? The 12-year-old Penelope painted before my eyes gradually turned into a 14-year-old myself. What about the leftovers of someone's? Have you ever mixed up what you put together to buy food that tastes like trash? You've never had one, have you? Why did I wish your sister would never come back? Favorability 1%, favorite 4%. Leonard's favorability dropped in an instantaneously. If I didn't want to die, I had to shut up immediately, and at least spoil his knees. I'm afraid I'll go back to that time. But instead of praying that I was wrong, I chose to reveal the fear and desperation that I hid desperately. Because Penelope would have done that at that time, and I would have prayed to God that the real princess wouldn't come back. I'm afraid I'm going to go back to my life looking on the streets all day begging someone to drop some food. Penelope. Say it, I'm listening. Leonard called me in a stifling voice. My still cry is over. I faced him breathing heavily. The fear that favorability would fall and die has disappeared. Even if I die right away, I won't regret it for Penelope, who grew up in lost anger and disgust. And it was just a moment of silence, and quietly waiting for the end to come. His head flashed like a flash. 7% likability. I thought you were. Leonard was speechless with a stiff, frozen face. He deserved it. It's a story of those low-down lives that he's never heard of before. After a long pause, he managed to broach a word. I didn't know you had such a hard time. In an instant things turned around. I felt indescribable when I saw Leonard puzzled, who had no idea what to do, just like me, who was sweating and choosing what to say. You must haven't know, Penelope. You think that you've always thought I was in fact so clever that I twisted the Duke of Eckhart and took your sister's place. That's if so, I hope you know now. I stared at him with cold eyes, and I felt a prick of my brain when you accused me of being a necklace thief. I was a 12-year-old commoner who couldn't even write properly. Leonard's mouth, which was open to answer something, was as sweet as a lie. I could see the blue pupils slowly being colored by shock, but none of it was refreshing. It was then, beyond Leonard's back, a loud roar rang through the sky out of the open window. During the meaningless war of attrition with him, darkness lay outside even with the sunset. Fireworks have begun. Leaving behind the beautiful sight of colorful fireworks embroidered in the black sky, we both looked at each other silently. Every time the firecracker exploded, the colorful shadow of light shone on Leonard's face, and repeated that it would disappear. Maybe that's why his expression staring at me, I thought, seemed a little bit nervous. At that moment, the top of the pink hair glistened once again. 14% likability. The favorability has risen sharply. It was almost at the same time that a white window appeared before my eyes. Festival view. Quest success with Leonard. Would you like to receive a reward for quest? Yes, no. I smiled, disheartened at the quest window, which suddenly appeared in a situation that should not have appeared. Whether or not the favorability is broken, will you succeed if you meet the requirements of the quest? But in the end, yes, this situation, which had to press yes, made me shudder. Reward favorite plus 3% and crossbows of Leonard for has received. Looking at the sensitivity of rising straight away, I felt the steam ahead just subsided like a dying embers. Unlike me, a brilliant fireworks display was still in full swing outside the window. Even if I get kicked out of this house, I'm just going back to being a poor commoner. It's weird, I muttered to myself through the loud firecrackers. You always make me miserable, like a beggar, worse than a slave. Leonard's wobbly face was completely distorted by my voice. Perhaps it was from this point on what I began to imagine after I left the dukedom. I looked at him for a moment with my burning eyes like ashes and turned around. Penelope. Leonard called me and tried to catch me with an urgent gesture. But I left the attic without even pretending to look back. Coming down the dark stone steps alone, I alternated with Leonard's likes and impulsively non-talking conversation. Favorite 17%. It was a really generous result for a person determined to die. Of course, the past of Penelope I poured out was all a great lie. I don't know her past. That didn't even come out of the game. He said he ate rainwater next to the dead body and that he ate leftovers and leftovers. All those nasty stories. He must have been like this. It's just an assumption I want to make. Not my story. Other rewards earned by completing the Leonard and the festival quest were paid shortly after that. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe. Click the bell icon for notifications.